You ever lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, asking yourself, what the hell am I even doing here? That silence, it's not really silent, it's loud, louder than any battlefield, louder than any crowd, louder than any storm. It's the sound of your own mind screaming at you, and you can't run from it. You can't silence it with noise. You can't drown it in distraction, because no matter where you go, there you are. And that's where this story begins, with you, with me, with every human who's ever carried pain so heavy it felt like it was carved into their bones. The universal descent of life starts with a cry. Think about that. The very first act of being alive is pain. A baby doesn't enter the world laughing. It enters screaming, breath ripping through tiny lungs, skin raw from the first touch of air. Life begins in chaos, in discomfort, in raw vulnerability. That cry, that's the sound of existence announcing itself. And from that moment forward, whether you're the son of a king or the daughter of a farmer, the truth doesn't change. Pain is the first language we all understand. Philosophers knew this. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who carried an empire on his shoulders, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But before he could write those words, before he could stand on the marble steps of Rome and face the chaos of war, he too knew despair. He too felt loneliness. He too wrestled with the silence of his own thoughts. This is where greatness begins, not in the sunlight of triumph, but in the shadows of doubt. The loneliness of the soul. Imagine Nelson Mandela, alone, a small, damp cell on Robben Island, concrete floor, thin blanket, years stretching out like a horizon that never moves closer. He was a leader, a fighter, but in that darkness, stripped of crowds, stripped of speeches, stripped of freedom, he was just a man, alone with his own pain. That's where the battle is fought. Not on stages, not under lights, not in front of cameras, but in the quiet, in the stillness, in the moments nobody sees. And if you've ever felt that the loneliness, the heaviness, the feeling that the weight of existence is pressing your chest flat, then you know the truth. Greatness doesn't come in golden packages. It comes raw, bleeding, scarred. The edge of the abyss, there's a word the Germans use. Weltschmerz. It means world pain. The ache of realizing that reality will never match the dreams you once had. That gap between what we hope for and what life gives us, that's the abyss. Every visionary, every philosopher, every warrior has stared into that abyss. Nietzsche wrote about it. If you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. What does that mean? It means when you're broken, when you're staring into the blackness of despair, it's not just that you're looking into nothingness, that nothingness looks back. It tests you. It asks you, are you going to let me swallow you? Or are you going to climb out, inch by inch, bleeding, and make me regret not finishing you when I had the chance? That's life. That's the emotional beginning. The story of ordinary pain. You don't need to be a king or a prisoner or a philosopher to know this. You don't need marble palaces or prison bars to meet despair. Sometimes it's just a job you hate. Sometimes it's a family that doesn't understand you. Sometimes it's a dream you chased and lost. A factory worker in Detroit, a single mother in Karachi, a student in Tokyo who feels invisible, a soldier in the desert who feels forgotten. Different faces, different languages, same truth, pain, loneliness, fear. History remembers the speeches, the victories, the revolutions, But it forgets the nights when people lay awake and asked themselves if they could even survive until morning. And yet, it's in those forgotten hours that destiny is shaped. Because the truth is, the people who change history aren't the ones who never broke. They're the ones who broke and still got up. Letters of despair, listen to Abraham Lincoln. Before he became the president who ended slavery, before the Gettysburg Address, before the legend, Lincoln wrote letters to friends about his despair. He once wrote, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth." This is the man we put on currency, the man carved into stone monuments. And yet, in the silence of his own room, he was drowning. That is the emotional beginning. When you hear Goggins say, "Stay hard," this is where that comes from. It's not about lifting weights. It's not about running 100 miles. It's about facing the raw truth that life will break you, and deciding you will not stay broken. Pain as the first teacher. Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha, was a prince, born in luxury, surrounded by gardens, music, silk, and feasts. His father tried to shield him from all pain, all suffering. But one day he saw sickness, he saw death, he saw old age, and it shattered him. He realized that no amount of wealth could protect the human heart from suffering. That realization led him to renounce his palace, to wander, to seek truth. And what truth did he find? That suffering is not the end, it is the beginning. Pain isn't a curse, it's a teacher. It doesn't whisper, it doesn't politely knock on your door. It breaks the door down and drags you into the street until you face it. And in that confrontation, you are forged. The weight of memory, think about your own scars, physical or invisible. The breakup that hollowed you out, the failure that burned your pride to ashes, the rejection letter that crushed your dreams, the funeral where you stood helpless, watching someone you loved lowered into the ground. You carry those moments. You don't erase them. They become part of you. They are weight, and in that weight, there is a choice. You either let it bury you, or you use it to build strength. This is what Goggins means when he says you have to callous your mind. A callus isn't pretty. It's tough, it's rough, it's ugly, but it's protection. Every scar, every pain, every heartbreak, it's a callus on your soul. And those calluses, they make you untouchable. The cinematic silence, picture it. A man alone on a road at night, streetlights flickering, shoes torn, sweat dripping. Cameras, no applause, just him, the pavement, and his thoughts. That's where greatness is built. In the silence nobody sees. That's why this section is called Emotional Beginnings, because every epic begins here, not with trumpets, not with celebration, but with a cry, a doubt, a fear, a breaking. The truth no one escapes. Every single one of us is walking on borrowed time. You, me, the strongest warrior, the brightest mind, the most powerful leader. The second we're born, the countdown begins. That's the fragility of existence. We try to ignore it. We build distractions, careers, houses, followers, reputations. We convince ourselves we're permanent by surrounding ourselves with stuff. But deep down, we know the truth. Everything breaks. Every body withers. Every empire crumbles. Marcus Aurelius wrote, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. One conquered the known world. The other carried bags of grain. yet both returned to dust. That's the first lesson of fragility. No matter what you build, you will leave it behind. The shattered glass of time picture, a glass, smooth, whole, you hold it in your hands. But no matter how carefully you grip it, one day it will fall. It will break. That's life. Fragile, beautiful, temporary. Shakespeare called life a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and is heard no more. The stage is big, the lights are bright, but the performance is short, and the curtain always falls. The confrontation with death. Socrates stood trial in Athens, accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. He could have begged for his life, he could have run, but instead he drank the hemlock, calm, steady. He said, "To fear death, my friends, is only to think ourselves wise without being wise. For no one knows whether death may not be the greatest blessing of all." That's not fearlessness, that's acceptance. That's a man who looked fragility in the eye and said, "You don't own me." Contrast that with us today. We're terrified. We hide from the thought of death. We sanitize it, lock it away in hospitals, whisper about it in hushed voices. But fragility doesn't disappear because you don't talk about it. It follows you, like a shadow at noon. The modern illusion: we scroll endlessly, numb ourselves with dopamine, chase likes, buy things, build illusions of permanence. But fragility doesn't care about your Instagram feed. One second you're making plans, the next second a phone rings. A car swerves, a test result comes back, and suddenly the floor is gone. That's fragility. The Stoics trained themselves by imagining loss daily. Epictetus said, "When you kiss your child, whisper to yourself, 'Tomorrow they may die,' not because he was cold, but because he understood. When you face fragility, you appreciate the present, the letters of the doomed read, the diaries of soldiers in World War I, young men, barely 20, writing by candlelight in muddy trenches. Some wrote about mothers back home. Some wrote about fear. Some wrote poetry. Many never lived to send those letters. One wrote, "If I do not return, remember that I thought of you in my last moments, not with fear, but with love." That's fragility. One moment alive, the next a name etched on a stone, and yet within that fragility there is something unbreakable. Love, memory, spirit, the cry of the ordinary. Not all fragility is war or death. Sometimes it's smaller, quieter. The father who works his whole life and suddenly is too weak to climb stairs. The mother who forgets her child's name because of dementia. The friend you laughed with who suddenly disappears from your life. Because paths diverged, everything ends. Friendships, health, youth, dreams. That's fragility. But fragility isn't weakness. Fragility is what makes moments precious. If nothing ended, nothing would matter. If we didn't die, we wouldn't love. The turning of Mandela's fragility back to Mandela, 27 years in prison. Fragile body, broken health. He could have come out bitter, defeated, small. But fragility taught him strength. He learned patience, forgiveness, vision. And when the bars opened, he didn't just walk free. He led a nation. Fragility showed him what could be taken, but it also showed him what could never be broken, the will to endure. The fire within fragility. This is where Goggins enters. When he says, "You're going to die one day. Stop wasting time." He's not being morbid. He's reminding you of fragility. He's saying, don't act like you've got forever. You don't, you've got now. Fragility is a clock ticking. Every second you waste in fear, doubt, hesitation, that second is gone, burned, ashes. But fragility isn't the enemy. Fragility is the reminder that pushes you to live harder. The call of the samurai of Japan meditated daily on death. They believed a warrior had to die every morning in his mind so he could live fully during the day. If you accept fragility, you are free, free to fight, free to love, free to live, because the man who knows he will die is the man who finally begins to live. The furnace of humanity, every one of us has a furnace inside. Not the kind you light with wood, but the kind lit by pain. It burns when you lose. It burns when you fail. It burns when you're humiliated, betrayed, forgotten. That fire. That's suffering. And suffering is the one thing that every human in every era has shared. But here's the paradox. Suffering doesn't just destroy. It creates, it shapes, it hardens. Like steel in a blacksmith's fire, the hotter it burns, the stronger it becomes. That's the weight of suffering. It's heavy enough to crush you, but if you learn how to carry it, it transforms you. The stories of the broken look at Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychiatrist imprisoned in Auschwitz. He lost his family, his freedom, his home. He woke up each morning surrounded by death, starvation, brutality. But Frankl discovered something no guard, no hunger, no whip could take from him. The freedom to choose his attitude. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's the weight of suffering. It's unbearable if you resist it. But if you carry it with purpose, it lifts you." The prophet of tears Jeremiah, the weeping prophet of the Old Testament, walked through ruined cities. His people enslaved, his homeland destroyed, his heart broken. He cried out to God with words dripping in grief. And yet, even in lament, he found faith. His tears weren't weakness, they were testimony. That's the secret. Suffering is not the absence of strength. Suffering is the birthplace of strength. The soldier's burden. Think about the soldier who returns from war. He has scars, visible and invisible, nightmares, guilt, the weight of faces he can't forget. That suffering is heavy. But many of those soldiers take that weight and use it. They become teachers, leaders, protectors of the next generation. Their suffering becomes their power. The personal battle. You don't need a battlefield to feel this. Maybe your suffering is waking up with depression that chains you to the bed. Maybe it's working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Maybe it's carrying rejection, shame, or loss that no one else sees. That weight is real, it's heavy, it presses against your chest. But here's the truth. It can either crush you into dust, or it can compress you into a diamond. Letters from the abyss. Abraham Lincoln again. When his fiancée Anne Rutledge died young, he collapsed. Friends feared he'd kill himself. But through that grief, he grew into a man who could carry the sorrow of a divided nation. His personal suffering gave him the empathy and endurance to lead through civil war. The weight nearly killed him. Instead, it made him. The Buddhist lens. Buddhism begins with the truth of suffering. Life is dukkha. Life is suffering. You can't escape it. No wealth, no success, no fame will shield you. But suffering, the Buddha taught, can lead to awakening, to compassion, to wisdom. Without suffering, there is no growth. Without weight, there is no muscle. Without pain, there is no strength. Mandela's stones on Robben Island. Mandela was forced to break stones under the sun, day after day. Back-breaking, pointless labor. But he later said, those stones became his teachers. They taught him patience, endurance, discipline. That's the weight of suffering. The meaningless becomes meaningful when you carry it with vision. Goggins in the calloused mind. When Goggins talks about callousing the mind, he's talking about carrying the weight of suffering on purpose, running in pain, studying in humiliation, working when exhausted, choosing to carry more than your share until the mind hardens. Suffering doesn't vanish. You just get stronger. The turning point. But here's the thing. Suffering only transforms when you don't run from it. Most people run. They numb themselves with distractions, with excuses, with temporary relief. But those who stop running, who face suffering, who say, load me up, those people break through. Suffering is the price of transformation. The poetic weight. Listen to Khalil Gibran. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. That's poetry, but it's also truth. Every scar is a certificate of survival. Every wound is a teacher. Every loss is a classroom. The first cry freedom doesn't start with speeches. It doesn't start with revolutions or declarations written on paper. It starts inside one person's chest, a whisper that grows into a roar. This is not how I was meant to live. Every slave, whoever dreamed of the open sky, every prisoner who carved a mark on a wall, every oppressed soul who felt the weight of injustice and refused to accept it. That's where the cry begins. It is not polite. It is not patient. It is primal. Frederick Douglass and the power of voice. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery, beaten, starved, denied education. But he found a way to read, and when he read, he saw truth. He once said, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. That's the cry for freedom. Not just the breaking of chains, but the awakening of the mind. Douglass escaped slavery, but he didn't stop there. He stood before crowds and thundered with a voice that shook America awake. Freedom isn't just given, it's demanded, and Douglass demanded it. Gandhi and the weapon of silence. Different land, different chains. India under British rule, millions oppressed, a nation humiliated. And yet, one man chose not violence, but silence, fasting, spinning cloth, walking barefoot. Gandhi showed that freedom isn't always won with swords. Sometimes it's won with endurance. He said, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. His cry for freedom wasn't a scream. It was a whisper carried by millions until the empire itself trembled. The prisoner who became a President Mandela again. Prisoner 46,664, locked away for 27 years. But when the gates opened, he didn't call for revenge. He called for reconciliation. He cried not just for his freedom, but for the freedom of all South Africans, black and white. That's the cry for freedom in its purest form, not revenge, but dignity. Not destruction, but rebuilding. Harriet Tubman and the Underground Road. Imagine the night sky, stars above, dogs barking in the distance, a woman leading others through swamps, forests, fields, again and again. Harriet Tubman, born into slavery. She escaped, but she didn't stay free. She went back 13 times, saving over 70 people. Her cry for freedom wasn't just for herself, it was for everyone chained behind her. She became known as Moses, not because she parted seas, but because she parted fear. The philosophers Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Chains aren't just iron, Chains are ignorance. Chains are fear. Chains are systems built to make you small. The philosopher's cry is not just against kings and rulers, but against every idea that says, sit down, obey, don't question. Freedom begins when one mind dares to say, no. The modern struggle, look around today. The chains haven't vanished. They've changed shape. They look like poverty, racism, censorship, addiction, despair. Millions cry for freedom every day. Freedom from corruption, freedom from oppression, freedom from their own inner demons. That cry echoes across borders, across languages. It is the oldest and newest sound in the world. Goggins and the freedom. Within now bring it back to the individual. Goggins says, most people are enslaved by their own minds. That's the deepest truth. You can be free politically, socially, legally, and still be chained inside your head. Chained by laziness. Chained by fear. Chained by comfort. The cry for freedom is not just against governments. It's against the voice in your own head that tells you to quit, to stay small, to play safe. Breaking that inner chain is the hardest revolution of all. Suspense of sacrifice, but here's the cost. Freedom is never free. The cry for freedom always demands sacrifice. Blood, sweat, tears. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Arab Spring. Every cry for freedom shakes empires, but it also buries bodies. That's the price of dignity. Freedom without sacrifice is an illusion. The smallest light hope never begins as an explosion. It begins small, a whisper, a candle in a storm. Think of Anne Frank, a teenage girl hiding in an attic during the Nazi occupation, surrounded by war, death, cruelty, yet she wrote, I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. That's the spark. Surrounded by darkness, she chose to see light. Not because she was naive, but because hope was her rebellion. The science of sparks hope is not just poetry. It's biology. When a person feels hope, their brain releases dopamine, the chemical of possibility. It's the body's way of saying, keep going. The future might be better. That's why hope is dangerous to tyrants. It's why slaves were forbidden from singing certain songs. It's why dictators censor, because hope makes people believe change is possible. And once people believe, they stop obeying. Lincoln's flicker Lincoln again. In his darkest days, in a torn America, he said, the better angels of our nature. He didn't deny the war, the hatred, the blood. He simply pointed to a spark within humanity that could not be extinguished. The Civil War was hell. Yet even in hell, he saw the ember of unity, compassion, and justice. That spark carried a nation forward. The hope of Gandhi's walk, imagine it. Gandhi, an old man, frail, walking 240 miles to the sea. No weapons, just footsteps. Thousands followed. The Salt March wasn't just about salt. It was about dignity. Every step was a spark. One spark of defiance can ignite millions of hearts. Rosa Parks' quiet, sparky, tired seamstress on a bus in Montgomery. She refused to give up her seat. No violence, no shouting, just stillness. But that act became a spark. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted over a year and shook the foundations of segregation. The smallest action, born of quiet courage, can light a flame bigger than any torch. The spark in the personal battlefield hope doesn't just move nations. It saves individuals. The recovering addict who wakes up and says, not today. The student who fails again and again, then whispers, one more try. The single parent who looks at their child and says, "For you, I'll keep going." That's the spark. Fragile but fierce, small but unstoppable. Mandela's Sunrise Mandela once said, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." That is the essence of the spark. Choices guided by hope change everything. One sunrise after 27 years in prison carried not bitterness, but vision. That vision sparked reconciliation in a nation that could have collapsed into revenge. The spark? In World War II, when Britain faced Nazi bombs night after night, Winston Churchill went on radio and thundered, "We shall never surrender." Hope doesn't mean denying reality. Hope means facing reality without surrendering to it. Those words were sparks, keeping a nation alive when it was nearly broken. Goggins, hope in the grind for Goggins. Hope isn't abstract. It's not pretty. It's practical, he says. When you think you're done, you're only at 40%. That's hope in its rawest form. The belief that you can push further, even when your body screams no. That belief is a spark. And that spark separates those who quit from those who break through. The furnace of determination hope is the spark, but sparks die if they aren't fed. What feeds them? Resilience. Resilience is waking up after the defeat, the heartbreak, the failure, and choosing to keep moving. It's the decision that says, "I refuse to quit no matter how many times I break." Think of Thomas Edison. He failed over 1,000 times trying to invent the light bulb. When asked why he didn't give up, he said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's not luck, that's resilience. Fire burning through rejection until the world itself is lit. Nelson Mandela, from prison to power, we've seen Mandela in chains. But resilience wasn't just his survival, it was his transformation. Prison didn't make him smaller, it made him larger. He emerged, not bitter, but stronger, sharper, unbreakable. He said, "Do not judge me by my successes, judge me by how many times I fell and got back up again." That is resilience, the fire that refuses to go out, even in the wind of despair. The Marathon of Shackleton in 1914, Ernest Shackleton led an expedition to Antarctica. His ship, the Endurance, was trapped in ice, crushed and destroyed. For 2 years, he and his men survived in freezing darkness, starving, drifting across the Antarctic wasteland. But Shackleton never quit. He sailed a lifeboat across 800 miles of stormy seas to save his crew. Every man returned alive, not because the odds were good, but because Shackleton's fire of resilience never dimmed. The athletes who bleed every marathoner, every fighter, every champion knows this. Resilience is built in the body and the mind, the miles that hurt, the punches that knock you down, the practices in empty gyms when no one is watching. Muhammad Ali said, "I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion." That is resilience, pain transformed into glory. Goggins, the blueprint. Goggins himself, overweight, broken, depressed, spraying cockroaches as an exterminator. But then came the Navy SEAL dream. He failed pull-up attempts. He failed runs. He broke bones, tore muscles, coughed blood. He went through hell weak 3 times. But resilience carried him. He didn't stop when he failed. He didn't stop when he bled. He didn't stop when he was humiliated. He stayed in the fire until the fire became part of him. That's why he says, suffering is the true test of life. Resilience in silence sometimes. Resilience is loud battles, speeches, revolutions. Sometimes it's quiet, like Malala Yousafzai, shot in the head by the Taliban for wanting to go to school. She survived, she healed, she stood on world stages and declared, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Resilience is a girl with scars, turning bullets into a voice that cannot be silenced. The philosophy of fire, the Stoics, again. Epictetus, born a slave, beaten so badly that his leg was permanently crippled. Yet he taught philosophy that survives to this day. He said, difficulties show what men are. A storm doesn't destroy the oak tree, it reveals its roots. That's resilience. The hidden fire, not all resilience, makes history books. Sometimes it's the mother working to shifts, still smiling at her child. Sometimes it's the student, failing again and again, but refusing to quit. Sometimes it's the patient fighting cancer day after day, breath after breath. Resilience is not glamorous, it's ordinary. But in its ordinariness, it's extraordinary. The fire that spreads is contagious. One person standing up inspires another. One person refusing to quit creates a ripple. Look at movements, civil rights, independence, revolutions. They weren't built on one act, but on countless ordinary acts of resilience, multiplied until they became unstoppable. Section 7. The call to greatness, soundscape, the steady fire of resilience shifts into horns, like a rising dawn, a slow build of orchestral power, as if something vast and unstoppable is about to awaken. The whisper of destiny greatness doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It begins as a whisper, a nudge in the soul. A question, what if there's more? What if I was meant to change something, even in a small way? Socrates heard it. He called it his daimon, a guiding voice that steered him toward his mission. Gandhi heard it when he left the comforts of England to walk barefoot with the people of India. Greatness is not chosen at random. It calls to those who have suffered, those who have endured. Pain is the training ground. Resilience is the fire. But the call is when destiny says, now is your time. Alexander the Great, the young flame Alexander, wasn't born just to inherit a kingdom. He was taught by Aristotle, surrounded by legends of Homer's heroes, and from a young age he believed the world itself could be conquered. When his father was assassinated, Alexander could have been swallowed by grief, rebellion, or fear. Instead, he listened to the call. By 30, he ruled the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Yes, he was flawed. Yes, he was ruthless. But Alexander represents the raw truth. Greatness answers when history knocks. Joan of Arc, the peasant who heard a teenage peasant girl in 15th century France. She claimed she heard the voices of saints telling her to lead armies against the English. She had no rank, no armor, no nobility, but she had the call, and she followed. She led troops into battle. She turned the tide of war. She faced fire, literally burned at the stake at 19. But her greatness outlived her. She became a symbol of faith, courage, and destiny. The philosophy of greatness, Nietzsche wrote, become who you are. The call to greatness is exactly that, the struggle to rise into the fullest version of yourself. It's not about glory, it's not about titles. It's about becoming the person who refuses mediocrity, who refuses to shrink back into the shadows. The revolutionary thinkers' histories. Revolutions weren't just battles. They began with thinkers. Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses. Rousseau writing The Social Contract. Karl Marx writing the Communist Manifesto. Their words were sparks, and those sparks became fires that reshaped nations. Greatness often begins with a pen before it becomes a sword. The call in chains sometimes. Greatness calls those already crushed. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. Whipped, beaten, denied education. But he secretly learned to read and write. He escaped. He spoke. He wrote his autobiography, exposing slavery's horrors. His words shook nations. He became the most powerful voice against slavery, standing face to face with presidents. That's the call. Chains didn't silence him. They sharpened him. David Goggins. Modern warrior call for Goggins. The call came in a moment of despair. Obese, broken, cleaning out cockroach-infested restaurants. He turned on the TV and saw Navy SEALs in action. And something in him said, "That's it. That's what I'm meant for." Everyone laughed at him. Everyone doubted him. But that call turned into transformation. Into one of the hardest men alive. Into an author, a speaker, a guide for millions. The call doesn't care where you start. It cares whether you answer. The danger of refusing the call, every epic hero faces the choice. Ignore the call or answer it. Many ignore it. They settle into comfort, distraction, safety, and their greatness dies quietly, buried beneath excuses. Joseph Campbell, who studied myths across cultures, called this stage the call to adventure. Heroes always resist it at first, but if they resist forever, the story never begins. Greatness is a door, but you must walk through it. The leaders who heard Lincoln heard the call when America was breaking apart. Churchill heard the call when bombs rained on London. Mother Teresa heard it in the cries of Calcutta's dying. They weren't superheroes. They were human beings who listened when history whispered, "Stand up. The world needs you." The spirit that refuses chains empires rise and fall. Dictators rule with iron fists. But through every era, one thing refuses to bow. The human spirit. Slaves rebelled in Rome under Spartacus. Farmers rose up in France during the Revolution. The oppressed of India followed Gandhi's salt march against the British. The chains are real, the whips are real, the guns are real, but the spirit is stronger. The Warsaw Uprising, a city that fought Nazi Germany, controlled Warsaw. The people were starving, broken, surrounded by tanks. But the human spirit doesn't measure odds. It only asks, do we fight or do we die on our knees? They chose to fight. For 63 days they resisted. Against impossible odds, with barely any weapons, they rose. Yes, the uprising was crushed. Yes, thousands died. But history remembers them, not as victims, but as warriors. The spirit of Warsaw said, "You can kill us, but you cannot kill what we stand for." The Civil Rights Movement, Marching Souls, Washington, D.C., Martin Luther King. Junior stands before hundreds of thousands and declares, "I have a dream." That dream wasn't fantasy, it was spirit. It was generations of enslaved ancestors speaking through him. It was the power of the human spirit refusing to accept segregation, humiliation, degradation. Water hoses couldn't drown it. Dogs couldn't bite it away. Jails couldn't lock it down. Because once the human spirit rises, it cannot be silenced. Mandela, the prisoner who became a nation 27 years behind bars. Concrete walls, a tiny cell, hard labor. Nelson Mandela should have been broken, but when the prison gates finally opened, he didn't walk out bitter. He walked out stronger. He walked out as the embodiment of South Africa's spirit. Mandela proved something eternal. Prisons can hold bodies, but never souls. The human spirit in survival, it's not always politics or war. Sometimes, the spirit shows itself in survival. Itself, think of the 1972 Andes plane crash. Survivors trapped in the mountains for 72 days. Cold, starving, hopeless. Yet the human spirit refused to let them die quietly. They climbed mountains, walked through frozen hell, and lived to tell their story. When the body weakens, the spirit screams louder. One more step, one more breath, one more chance. The fire in everyday people, the human spirit doesn't only roar in revolutions. Sometimes it whispers in ordinary people who refuse to quit. The mother working 3 jobs so her children eat. The refugee walking barefoot across deserts for a chance at life. The student failing again and again, but still showing up. These are not headlines. These are not statues in history, but they are the spirit of humanity at its purest. Ordinary people refusing to bow, faith as spirits. Fuel every civilization has called on faith to fuel its spirit. For the oppressed Hebrews, it was Moses saying, "Let my people go." For early Muslims, it was the Hijra, leaving everything for freedom of worship. For enslaved Africans in America, it was gospel songs sung in the fields, music that turned pain into hope. Faith is the language of the human spirit. It turns despair into endurance. The science of spirit, modern psychology, tries to measure resilience. They call it grit. They call it post-traumatic growth. But the truth is, spirit isn't quantifiable. It's not brain chemistry. It's not a hormone. It's something deeper. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, that spirit, the freedom that no whip, no dictator, no suffering can take away. The furnace of struggle, every trial you face is fire. And fire does 2 things. It either burns you into ash, or it forges you into steel. History remembers not those who avoided trials, but those who endured them. The Roman gladiators bled in arenas. Samurai embraced death before dishonor. The Prophet Muhammad and his followers starved during the boycott of Mecca. Gandhi went to prison. Goggins ran until his feet split open. The pattern is eternal. Trial first, triumph later. The story of Job. Scripture gives us one of the rawest lessons. Prophet Job was stripped of wealth, family, and health. Everything gone, skin covered in disease, friends abandoning him, but he refused to curse his Lord. He endured, he remained patient, and in the end, triumph. His health returned, his family restored. His story became a symbol for all humanity. Trials are not punishment, they are proving grounds. Thomas Edison, the 10,000 failures, the world remembers the light bulb. But before the triumph of light, Edison failed over 10,000 times. When asked why he didn't quit, he replied, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Trials didn't defeat him. They carved him into a man capable of bringing light to the world. The climb of Mount Everest, Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbed into history as the first men to summit Everest. But what people forget, thousands of steps of trial, storms that nearly killed them, frostbite, exhaustion, lungs screaming for oxygen. The mountain didn't just test their bodies, it tested their spirit. It demanded proof. Are you worthy of this triumph? And they proved it, step by bloody step. Trials of nations, nations too are tested. Japan was reduced to ashes in 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki burned. But the Japanese spirit rebuilt, and within decades they became an economic giant. Germany split and, humiliated after World War II, endured trial after trial until the Berlin Wall fell, uniting a people again. Pakistan, born in 1947 out of bloodshed, partition, and migration, survived famine, poverty, and political chaos. The trial was survival itself, and survival was triumph. History is the witness. Nations are not destroyed by trial. They are refined by it. Muhammad Ali, the Kumbhakali, was stripped of his title, banned from boxing for refusing to fight in Vietnam, years in exile, his body aging, his career supposedly finished. But Ali's trials were his triumph. When he returned, he shocked the world by regaining the heavyweight crown, and when asked how he endured, he said, "Don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion." Triumph is not comfort, understand this. Triumph is not comfort. Triumph is not luxury. Triumph is not applause. Triumph is the scar on your body. Triumph is the pain you carried and refused to let crush you. Triumph is the whisper inside you saying, "I will not break." The power of the spoken word long before books, before microphones, before YouTube. Humanity was moved by voice. A single voice could summon armies. A single voice could end oppression. A single voice could ignite a movement, tear down walls, and breathe courage into broken souls. Words, once spoken with fire, do not die. They become eternal echoes. Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream. August 28, 1963, Washington, D.C. A crowd of over 250,000. Dr. King stood not just as a man, but as a vessel for justice. His voice thundered, "I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places made plain, and the crooked places made straight." It was not merely a speech, it was a prophecy, a moral command that bent history toward freedom. Winston Churchill, "We shall fight on the beaches." Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Defeat seemed inevitable. Then came Churchill, growling like a bulldog. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Those words carried a nation on their shoulders. They turned despair into defiance. Muhammad, the farewell sermon 632 AD, the Prophet Muhammad, standing before thousands at Arafat, delivered his final address. He declared equality. All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. A white has no superiority over a black, nor does a black have any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action. A voice in the desert, 1,400 years ago, still echoing as a foundation of human dignity. Abraham Lincoln. Gettysburg addressed the American Civil War, a battlefield soaked with blood. Lincoln stood among graves and spoke only 272 words. Yet those words reshaped a nation. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Short speech, eternal echo. Malcolm X, by any means necessary, Harlem. Malcolm X thundered, we declare our right on this earth. To be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society. On this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. Not a whisper of compromise, a roar of self-respect, a declaration of identity. Voices of the silent knot. Every voice comes from a podium. Anne Frank, a teenage girl, wrote in her diary while hiding from Nazi terror, "I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart." Her quiet voice whispers hope across generations. Nelson Mandela, behind prison walls for 27 years, wrote letters that became a nation's heartbeat of resilience. Viktor Frankl, in a Nazi concentration camp, left us man's search for meaning, proving that even in the pit of hell, the voice of the soul cannot be silenced. Gandhi, the call of non-violence with no army, no weapons. Gandhi stood before the might of the British Empire and spoke, in a gentle way, "You can shake the world," and he did. His voice carried more weight than cannons. His silence carried more power than swords. Voices that still live, every one of these words, from King to Churchill, from Muhammad to Gandhi, still lives because they were spoken with truth, and truth, once spoken, cannot be killed. It echoes, it inspires, it multiplies. When the world crumbles, every life, every nation, every dream eventually reaches this moment. The moment when everything seems lost, the edge of collapse. This is not metaphorical despair. It is the real thing. Armies about to be annihilated. Movements betrayed by their own. Families ripped apart by war, famine, or exile. Leaders staring at their own execution. Ordinary people kneeling in the silence of hopelessness. Collapse comes not as a whisper, but as a storm that strips away illusions, leaving only the raw truth of survival. The Roman Empire, a world in ashes for 76 AD. Rome fell, once the eternal city, a civilization that ruled the known world. Roads, aqueducts, armies, emperors, gone, burned. For the people of that age, it wasn't just politics. It was the end of the world. Imagine growing up believing Rome would last forever, then watching it crumble in your lifetime. This is collapse. The shattering of what you thought eternal. Nelson Mandela, betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten in 1962. Nelson Mandela was arrested. His dream of liberation turned into a nightmare of solitary walls. For decades, it seemed the movement for South African freedom was dead. He wrote in his prison diary, "I was a man who had dedicated his life to the struggle, yet I was now forced to live like a monk." It felt like collapse, yet collapse was only the beginning of something greater. The betrayal of Julius Caesar, 44 BC, the Roman Senate floor. Caesar, conqueror of nations, stood surrounded by supposed allies. And then the knives flashed. His closest friend, Brutus, pierced his flesh. Collapse is not only defeat by enemies, it is the betrayal of those you trusted most. History has taught us that collapse often comes from within. From cracks we refuse to see. World War II, Dunkirk, the British Army, cornered on the beaches of Dunkirk, 400,000 soldiers, trapped between the sea and Hitler's advancing forces. Collapse was imminent. Then came the little ships. Fishermen, civilians, ordinary people crossing the channel under fire to rescue soldiers. It was nearly the end, but from the edge of collapse, survival clawed its way forward. Abraham Lincoln, alone in the White House during the American Civil War. The Union was fracturing. Lincoln's generals betrayed him. His cabinet doubted him. His nation hated him. He wrote, "I am now the most miserable man living. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not." Even the strongest leaders feel collapse. The weight of a nation bent his back, but his refusal to yield kept the republic alive. The human collapse is not always global. Sometimes it is intensely personal. The business you gave your soul to, bankrupt overnight. The marriage you trusted, shattered by betrayal. The health diagnosis that rips away your future in a single sentence. Collapse is universal. Everyone will face it. No one escapes. Why collapse matters. The end of collapse is not the end. It is the crucible. Like steel in the forge, collapse burns away weakness. What remains is raw, unbreakable. Every philosopher knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Nietzsche declared, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." The Quran reminds, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." 94-6. Collapse is not failure. It is transformation in disguise. David Goggins, The Edge of the Human Body Goggins, tells of running his first 100-mile race without proper training. His body broke down at mile 70. He urinated blood. His legs collapsed beneath him, but he dragged himself through. That was not strength. That was collapse, and the refusal to surrender at collapse's edge. He calls it the 40% rule. When you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your capacity. Collapse is not the end. It's the invitation to see what lies beyond. The darkest hour there is always a moment when everything seems finished. The night presses hardest just before the light appears. Your strength is gone. Your hope is gone. The world is silent, and it feels like you are the only one left breathing. This is the moment before dawn. It is not collapse. Collapse already happened. It is not despair. Despair already crushed you. It is the hollow, the emptiness after the storm, where nothing moves. The question is, will you wait long enough to see the sun? Viktor Frankl, Finding Light in Auschwitz. Viktor Frankl watched his family vanish, his freedom stripped, his body broken, and yet he writes in Man's Search for Meaning, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any." How, in the darkest hour, Frankl found his dawn not in freedom, but in meaning. He chose to believe his suffering was shaping something greater. That choice kept him alive. The night had no power against his why. Harriet Tubman, A Path. Through darkness, she walked through swamps and woods at night, guiding slaves to freedom, with dogs and guns hunting her. The risk of capture, certain death. But Harriet Tubman pressed forward, whispering prayers into the cold air. Every night she carried others through was the darkest hour of their lives. But with each step she proved dawn was coming. Abraham Lincoln, alone in the White House Civil War at its bloodiest, his generals failing, his own people divided, his son dead, his wife sinking into grief. Lincoln sits alone, whispering into the silence, "I am driven to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I have nowhere else to go." That night was his darkest hour, and yet, beyond it, the dawn of Union victory awaited. The samurai's night vigil in Japan. The samurai meditated on death every night. They rehearsed their end, so when dawn came, they were unafraid to live. For them, the night was not emptiness. It was a sharpening of the spirit. The darkest hour was the forge where courage was hammered. Martin Luther King Jr., jail cell. Silence in Birmingham. King sat in a narrow jail cell. The movement faltered. Leaders wavered. Betrayal hung heavy. He wrote on scraps of newspaper. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It was his darkest hour, and yet the letter became a dawn that still lights the conscience of nations. The weight of silence, the moment before dawn, is not always filled with action. Often it is filled with silence. Silence where no answer comes. Silence where your prayers echo back empty. Silence where you wait and wait and wait. But silence is not absence. It is preparation. The seed does not break the soil in the night, but it grows. Always it grows. David Goggins, the quiet before the run-bee, for his longest runs, before his hardest tests. Goggins describes the silence, the doubt, the stillness, where his body whispers, "Don't do it," but he leans into that silence. He calls it the place where weakness dies. That is the moment before dawn, the hesitation, the battle in the mind. He says, "You will never know how far you can go unless you face the silence head-on." Why the darkness deepens before dawn? Because dawn must be earned. Because if you rise too soon, you won't value the light. Because only when the night empties you completely can you be filled again. The darkest hour is the passage, the place between death and resurrection, between collapse and breakthrough. Your night, maybe you are in it now. Maybe you feel it. The silence, the weight, the emptiness. You are waiting for something that has not come. You are staring at a door that is not opened. You are fighting for a light that has not broken through. But hear this. If you are in the darkest hour, then dawn is already on its way. It is the law of existence, the rhythm of life, the cycle that cannot be broken. The night cannot stop the morning. The darkest hour there is always a moment when everything seems finished. The night presses hardest just before the light appears. Your strength is gone. Your hope is gone. The world is silent, and it feels like you are the only one left breathing. This is the moment before dawn. It is not collapse. Collapse already happened. It is not despair. Despair already crushed you. It is the hollow, the emptiness after the storm, where nothing moves. The question is, will you wait long enough to see the sun? Viktor Frankl, finding light in Auschwitz. Viktor Frankl watched his family vanish, his freedom stripped, his body broken, and yet he writes in Man's Search for Meaning, those who have a why to live can bear almost any. How, in the darkest hour, Frankl found his dawn not in freedom, but in meaning. He chose to believe his suffering was shaping something greater. That choice kept him alive. The night had no power against his why. Harriet Tubman, A Path. Through darkness, she walked through swamps and woods at night, guiding slaves to freedom, with dogs and guns hunting her. The risk of capture, certain death. But Harriet Tubman pressed forward, whispering prayers into the cold air. Every night she carried others through was the darkest hour of their lives. But with each step she proved dawn was coming. Abraham Lincoln, alone in the White House Civil War at its bloodiest, his generals failing, his own people divided, his son dead, his wife sinking into grief. Lincoln sits alone, whispering into the silence, "I am driven to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I have nowhere else to go." That night was his darkest hour, and yet, beyond it, the dawn of Union victory awaited. The samurai's night vigil in Japan. The samurai meditated on death every night. They rehearsed their end, so when dawn came, they were unafraid to live. For them, the night was not emptiness. It was a sharpening of the spirit. The darkest hour was the forge where courage was hammered. Martin Luther King Jr., jail cell. Silence in Birmingham. King sat in a narrow jail cell. The movement faltered. Leaders wavered. Betrayal hung heavy. He wrote on scraps of newspaper. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It was his darkest hour, and yet the letter became a dawn that still lights the conscience of nations. The weight of silence, the moment before dawn, is not always filled with action. Often it is filled with silence. Silence where no answer comes. Silence where your prayers echo back empty. Silence where you wait and wait and wait. But silence is not absence. It is preparation. The seed does not break the soil in the night, but it grows. Always it grows. David Goggins, the quiet before the run bee, for his longest runs, before his hardest tests. Goggins describes the silence, the doubt, the stillness where his body whispers, "Don't do it," but he leans into that silence. He calls it the place where weakness dies. That is the moment before dawn, the hesitation, the battle in the mind. He says, you will never know how far you can go unless you face the silence head on. Why the darkness deepens before dawn because dawn must be earned. Because if you rise too soon, you won't value the light. Because only when the night empties you completely can you be filled again. The darkest hour is the passage, the place between death and resurrection, between collapse and breakthrough. Your night, maybe you are in it now. Maybe you feel it. The silence, the weight, the emptiness. You are waiting for something that has not come. You are staring at a door that is not opened. You are fighting for a light that has not broken through. But hear this. If you are in the darkest hour, then dawn is already on its way. It is the law of existence, the rhythm of life, the cycle that cannot be broken. The night cannot stop the morning. Section 14. The arrival of light soundscape, slow swell of strings, first golden rays breaking through silence. A soft choir hums faintly in the background. The first glimpse, there's a magic in that first sliver of light. It is not sudden. It creeps in, gentle but unstoppable. And in that moment, something inside shifts. The heaviness that pressed down begins to lift. The cold begins to soften. The arrival of light is not just about the sun. It is about seeing again. It is about realizing that what felt final was only a beginning. Nelson Mandela, 27 years for a sunrise Robben Island. 27 years in a prison cell. Days of crushing labor. Nights of silence. But Mandela never gave up the dawn. And when the light finally came, when he walked free, when he became president of South Africa, it was not just his dawn. It was a nation's, he said. I never lost hope that this great transformation would occur. It always seems impossible until it is done. The light arrived because he never stopped waiting for it. Helen Keller, light without sight, blind and deaf from infancy. Trapped in darkness, no eye could pierce, no ear could escape. Until one day her teacher pressed her hand under water, spelling WRTR into her palm. That was her dawn, a single word opening the world. Helen Keller would later write, "Keep your face to the sun, and you will never see the shadows." The arrival of light for her was not in vision, but in understanding. It was enough to ignite a lifetime of inspiration. Winston Churchill, the day of victory, after years of bombings, deaths, ration lines, despair. Britain stood battered, but May 8th, 1945, victory in Europe. Bells rang, crowds sang, tears flooded the streets. Churchill stood before his people and declared, "We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day." The light had arrived. Not cheaply, not quickly, but earned. Through blood and endurance. The Stoics on Don Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." For the Stoics, dawn itself was a gift. Every sunrise was proof, life remains. And so the struggle can continue. David Goggins breaking the seal for Goggins. The dawn often comes at miles 70, 80, 90 of a race. When the body is screaming, when every fiber says stop. But then a switch flips. The body gives up, but the mind takes over. That's the dawn. When the impossible starts to bend, when pain turns into fuel. He calls it the other side of suffering. That is the light dot. Why light matters? Because light gives proof. Because you can survive the night, but you cannot thrive in it. The dawn restores vision. It lets you see again where you are, who you are, and what is ahead. Without it, life is blind. Struggle with it. Life is meaningful journey. The universal dawn of culture has sung to the dawn in Hindu hymns. The goddess Ushas is the bringer of light, the awakener of souls. In Greek myth, Eos opens the gates of heaven with her rosy fingers. In the Quran, dawn is Fajr, the prayer that begins each day, symbolizing renewal and hope. Why? Because dawn is more than light. It is promise. It is forgiveness. It is the start again. Your dawn maybe. You've seen yours already. Maybe it was the day you came out of heartbreak and finally breathed again. Maybe it was the letter of acceptance. The birth of your child. The victory you thought impossible. Or maybe yours is still coming. And if it is, wait. Because no night is endless. The light is not a question of if. It is only a question of when. The child within discovery begins the way it always has, with a child reaching out for something new, the first steps, the first word, the first time they realize that touching water means feeling coolness, that pressing clay means shaping the world. Discovery is joy because it is revelation. It is the spark that says, "I can." And that spark has moved civilizations. Archimedes, Eureka. In his bath, he noticed water rise as his body sank. A sudden truth struck him. Displacement. Volume. Density. He leaped from the water, running naked through the streets of Syracuse, shouting, "Eureka! I have found it." That moment wasn't just about science. It was about the ecstasy of knowing. Discovery intoxicates. It pulls you beyond the ordinary into the miraculous. Galileo, the sky opens, small telescope. A decision to point it upward. What Galileo saw shattered the universe, moons orbiting Jupiter, mountains on the moon, stars too many to count. And with trembling hands, he wrote, "I render infinite thanks to God, who has been pleased to make me the first observer of marvelous things." Discovery is joy because it expands the horizon of what you thought was possible. Helen Keller. Again, words as worlds, when water in her hand became language. Helen Keller's discovery wasn't about utility, it was about joy. Because to discover is to unlock. Suddenly, she had keys to doors she never knew existed. She later wrote, "Once I knew only darkness and stillness. My life was without past or future. But a little word from the fingers of another fell into my hand that clutched at emptiness. and my heart leaped to the rapture of living. Einstein, child of curiosity. Albert Einstein once said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." His discovery of relativity began not in a lab, but in a thought experiment. What would it feel like to ride on a beam of light? That playful imagination reshaped physics forever. Discovery is joy because it belongs to anyone who dares to wonder. David Goggins. Discovering the other self for Goggins. Discovery is internal. The moment when he realized he could run further then his body screamed, when he could endure beyond his own imagined limits, that was discovery. He calls it finding another you, and in that discovery, he didn't just survive. He expanded who he was. That's joy, realizing you are more than you believed. Artistic awakening's discovery is not only in science or endurance, it's in art. Beethoven, deaf, discovering that silence itself could be turned into symphony. Van Gogh, tormented, discovering that color could scream louder than words. Maya Angelou, after silence, discovering that her voice could heal millions. Art is the joy of finding beauty where no one else saw it. Philosophers of wonder. Socrates, wonder is the beginning of wisdom. Aristotle, all men by nature desire to know. The joy of discovery is not just in what is found, but in the fact that you seek. The moment you lean forward into mystery, you are already alive in a way others are not. Why joy follows discovery? Because discovery is expansion. It enlarges the borders of the self. It transforms despair into possibility. Joy is not pleasure. Joy is meaning, the realization that the universe holds more than you imagined, and that you are part of it. Your discoveries think of your own. The first book that changed your life, the first time you understood something difficult and felt. It clicked at the day you realized you could do something you once thought impossible. Each was a dawn of its own. Each was joy born of discovery. The shared song of discovery, every age has sung it. Renaissance, artists painting man as divine in form. Enlightenment thinkers mapping the hidden laws of nature. Astronauts stepping onto the moon, declaring one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Every discovery is both personal and universal. It belongs to the discoverer, but it also belongs to us all. From survival to solidarity at first, man stood alone, against storm, against hunger, against fear. But the greatest discovery was not fire, or the wheel, or language. It was each other. When hands joined, when voices blended, when burdens were shared, man found not just survival, but strength. Ubuntu, I am because we are, an African proverb, says, Ubuntu. I am because we are. It means no life stands alone. Your joy is my joy. Your pain is my pain. It is the wisdom of the tribe that unity is not weakness, but the deepest power. Ancient gatherings look to the past. Tribes circled around fire, telling stories that stitched their hearts into one. Villagers raised walls and planted fields together, not because it was easy, but because it was possible only in unity. Warriors marched, not as individuals, but as formations, shields locked. Hearts steady. Unity is humanity's oldest celebration. Religion and unity, every faith whispers the same truth. The Quran, hold firmly to the rope of Allah all together, and do not become divided. The Bible, for where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. Buddhist Sangha, the fellowship that carries the Dharma forward. Faith knows no soul walks alone. The path is walked together. The march of movement's unity is not just ancient. It is alive, Gandhi leading thousands in silent march. Martin Luther King Jr. proclaiming, "We cannot walk alone." Nelson Mandela uniting a nation torn by hate. Their victories were not theirs alone. They were the roar of the many, the strength of unity, music of the people. Listen. When voices join in song, joy magnifies. A single voice is fragile. A choir of voices is unstoppable. National anthems, folk songs, stadium chants. They remind us that to be human is to sing together. David Goggins, the lone wolf who found unity. Even Goggins, the master of solitude and suffering, admits, "No man becomes great alone." In SEAL training, men carried boats over their heads. One man quitting meant all suffered. One man enduring meant all rose. Unity is forged in pain and celebrated in triumph. Modern symbols of unity, human chains forming during disasters. Strangers saving strangers. Crowds clapping for healthcare workers in the pandemic. Across balconies and streets, millions watching the same event. A World Cup, an Olympic flame, hearts synchronized in hope. The world may divide, but moments of unity remind us what we truly are. 1. Why unity creates joy? Because unity is belonging. It says, "You are not alone." It says, "Your burden is ours. Your victory is ours. Your story is ours." And when joy is shared, it does not divide, it multiplies. A vision of unity, imagine it. A field at sunset. People gathering, flags different, faces, different languages. Different, but when the drums begin, they all dance. And for that moment, there is no you or me. There is only us. That is the joy of unity, the vanishing of division, the rising of humanity. The circle of existence, every struggle has its end. Every race has its finish line. Every life, no matter how vast, meets its closing chapter. But the end is not defeat. The end is wisdom. The end is completion. Like the setting sun, it does not mourn, it glows. Mortality as fulfillment, the Stoics taught us to remember death, memento mori, not to fear it, but to embrace it, because death is not the enemy. It is the frame that gives life meaning. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Completion reminds us, life was never endless. It was always a circle. Religious completion in every faith, the close of life is not an emptiness, but a return. Islam. Death is a transition, a meeting with Allah, the end of dunya, the beginning of a khir. Christianity. Life eternal begins not in the flesh, but in the soul's completion. Hinduism, the soul sheds the body like a garment. Moving onward, completion is wisdom, knowing that we were always journeying home. Stories of completion. Socrates drank the hemlock, unafraid, because his life had been lived in truth. Mandela, in his old age, smiled not because he had no suffering left, but because his suffering had been completed, transformed into victory. Even Goggins says, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, all that's left is who you became through the suffering. Completion is not loss. It is fulfillment. Acceptance. There is a peace in reaching the end of a journey. A marathon runner collapsing at the finish line, not with despair, but with relief. A parent watching children groan, knowing the struggle was worth it. An artist finishing their final canvas, laying down the brush, knowing it is complete. Completion is the wisdom to know nothing lasts forever, but nothing was wasted. Joy in the circle, the seed falls. The tree rises, the fruit drops, the seed returns. So too does life. The cycle is not cruel, it is beautiful, because it means that nothing truly ends. It transforms, it completes, it begins again. The pulse of life, joy, sorrow, pain, triumph, they do not arrive once, they arrive always. Life is not a straight line, it is a heartbeat, a rise, a fall, a rise, a fall. Every sorrow returns, every joy returns, because existence itself is rhythm, ancient. Reflections, the Buddha said, all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. But the impermanence is not loss. It is cycle. In Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Seasons don't end life, they sustain it. Personal cycles. Think of your own journey. The despair you thought would never end, and yet it passed. The joy you thought would last forever, and yet it faded, and yet both returned in new forms. The pain shaped you, the joy sustained you. The cycle returns because life is not static. Life is living, breathing motion. Historical cycles, civilizations rise. They fall, they rise again in new forms. Movements surge, they are crushed, they surge again. Oppression takes hold. Freedom breaks through. Then the struggle returns. Nothing stays forever, but nothing is ever wasted. Each cycle deepens humanity's wisdom. Why the cycle matters without sorrow. Joy is meaningless. Without despair, hope cannot rise. Without failure, victory is hollow. The cycle is not punishment, it is gift. It ensures we keep learning, keep growing, keep transforming. David Goggins, Rhythm Even Goggins, speaks in cycles. He talks about running, pain, exhaustion, breakthrough, pain again, breakthrough again. Life is like that run. You hit walls, you break through, you hit walls again. The cycle never ends, but every return makes you stronger. The eternal dance imagine. The waves of the ocean, they crash, they retreat, they crash again. The beauty is not in one wave, it's in the endless dance of all waves. So too with the human heart. It breaks, it heals, it breaks again. And in that cycle, it becomes infinite. The torch that never dies, life ends. A body collapses. A heart stops. But an idea, a vision, a word spoken at the right time, that survives. Socrates is gone, yet his questions still live in classrooms, in minds, in every argument where truth is sought. Martin Luther King Jr. fell to an assassin's bullet, yet his dream walks in the streets of every city where freedom marches forward. Malala Yousafzai was silenced by a bullet, yet her voice became global thunder. This is the eternal flame of inspiration, the philosophy of immortality. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, wrote, "What we do now echoes in eternity." That echo is the flame. It does not stop when we stop. Gandhi's Salt March ended, but it ignited a movement that freed a nation. Rosa Parks' quiet refusal lasted a few minutes, but her stillness set fire to the conscience of millions. The moment ends. The flame does not. Goggins, Unbroken Fire. David Goggins speaks about the cookie jar, memories of past victories, struggles overcome, pain endured. But more than a jar, it's a fire. Every time he runs beyond exhaustion, every time he suffers beyond what others can endure, he lights a flame, and thousands who listen carry that flame into their own battles. That is immortality, not in statues, not in graves, but in fire passed hand to hand. Historical passing of the torch. The Greeks passed philosophy to Rome. Rome fell. But the Islamic Golden Age carried the torch, preserving and expanding the knowledge. Europe awoke in the Renaissance because that flame still burned. The Enlightenment carried it further, igniting revolutions in America, in France, across the globe. Knowledge, once lit, does not die. It moves, it spreads, it multiplies. Stories as fire. Every story told here of suffering, of resilience, of triumph is not just memory. It is fire. When Nelson Mandela walked free after 27 years, he did not just end a prison sentence. He lit a flame of reconciliation that still burns. When Helen Keller broke the silence of her world, she lit a torch for every person told they could not. One flame can ignite millions. That is how humanity survives despair. The flame in youth, eternal flame of inspiration, is not reserved for saints, leaders, or legends. It is in you. Every act of courage you take, every choice to rise instead of collapse, lights a fire in someone watching. Maybe a child, maybe a stranger, maybe someone you'll never meet, and that fire continues when you are gone. You are already immortal, not in years, but in the sparks you leave behind. Standing at the edge of tomorrow, we are not done. Humanity is not done. We stand, as we always have, on the edge of a cliff. Behind us, empires risen and fallen, songs sung and silenced, dreams chased and broken, victories carved from fire. Ahead, mystery, unknown, the future, and it is suspense itself, that silence before thunder, that shadow before dawn, that gives the journey its tension. Will we rise, or will we fall? The suspense of history's repeating echo. Every age has stood here. The ancient Greeks wondered, would Athens endure? The Romans wondered, would the empire stand forever? The medieval world wondered, is this the end or the beginning of something greater? And we wonder still, can humanity survive its own fire? Can we face climate, technology, division, and power without collapsing into the same cycle of ruin? Suspense is not an ending. It is the pause that demands courage. The Goggins mindset. At the edge, David Goggins says, we don't stop when we're tired. We stop when we're done. But what if humanity isn't done? What if the suspense is the signal that the run continues, that we've barely scratched the surface of our capacity? Suspense is fuel. It makes the unknown not a terror, but a challenge. When the body trembles, when the night whispers, when the future hides its face, that's the test. And Goggins would tell you, lean in, run toward it. Because on the other side of suspense is the only thing that matters. Growth, the arrival of eternity, and then after suspense comes eternity. Not eternity in the shallow sense of endless time, but eternity as wholeness, completion. Eternity is when the child becomes the elder, the question becomes the answer, the struggle becomes the song. Eternity is the cycle fulfilled, where the flame of inspiration becomes not just a spark in one life, but the heartbeat of existence itself. Marcus Aurelius accepted this truth. So did Rumi, whispering of love eternal. So did Mandela, forgiving not because it was easy, but because eternity was bigger than prison bars. Eternity is not far away. It is here, now, in every act that ripples forever. The joy of fulfillment. This is the happiness of eternity, the laughter of children, proof that the story continues, the embrace of friends after long separation, proof that love endures, the quiet of prayer, proof that the soul is never alone, the memory of struggle, now softened into wisdom, proof that pain was never. Wasted joy is not the absence of sorrow. Joy is sorrow fulfilled. It is the song that suffering wrote, finally played to completion, the cinematic ending soundscape, a swelling orchestral crescendo, violins, drums, choirs, rising as if the entire world is exhaling in harmony. Picture it, humanity walking together, hand in hand, across the unknown plane of the future. Some stumble, some rise, some fall, but the march continues, always. Suspense sharpens us, eternity completes us, and so the journey from despair to resilience, from silence to fire, from loneliness to unity, ends not in finality but in forever, because as long as one voice speaks, as long as one soul rises, as long as one flame burns, humanity continues, and that is eternity. The opening of the night, close your eyes. Feel the weight of today sink into the bed beneath you. Your body is tired, your mind still running. But tonight is not just about sleep. It's about remembering what it means to be alive. We stand, you and I, on the edge of tomorrow, not just as individuals, but as an entire species. Behind us lie empires built and destroyed, songs sung and silenced, victories carved out of fire, and dreams that fell to dust. Ahead of us lies something greater, the unknown, and this unknown, it is not to be feared, it is to be conquered. David Goggins says, "We don't stop when we're tired, we stop when we're done." But let me ask you this tonight. What if we are not done? What if the exhaustion you feel, the battles you've fought, the doubts you've carried, are not the end, but the beginning? You're not at the end of your story. Humanity is not at the end of its story. You are standing in suspense, that sacred pause before the storm breaks, before the dawn rises. Suspense is not death. Suspense is proof of life. The silence before thunder, the shadow before sunrise. That's where we stand. That's where you stand tonight. Suspense of histories echo every age has known this place, this edge of tomorrow. The ancient Greeks stood here asking, would Athens endure? The Romans stood here asking, would the empire last forever? The medieval world stood here asking, is this the end or the beginning of something greater? And here we are again, wondering, can we survive our own fire? Can we face the storms of technology, the floods of division, the wildfires of greed and fear, without collapsing into ruin? The echo of history whispers, many have fallen, but the suspense is not an ending. It is a demand for courage. Suspense is the universe asking, are you ready to rise? And that is the first truth of tonight's journey. Suspense sharpens you. It calls you forward. It does not let you sleep in comfort. It pushes you to rise in purpose. The pause between heartbeats is not death. It is preparation for life. Asterisk. The Goggins mindset at the edge. David Goggins knows the edge. He has lived in it, running on broken legs, fighting through hell weeks, bleeding in silence. He has stared into the abyss of pain and found not fear, but fuel, he says. When you think you're done, you're only at 40%, and that's where we are. Humanity is not at the end. You are not at the end. We are at 40%, standing at the edge of tomorrow with the rest of the climb still waiting. Suspense is the test. It is the voice in your head saying, stop, rest, quit. But that voice is a liar. The truth is on the other side of fear. When the body trembles, when the night whispers, when the future hides its face, that's the test. And Goggins would tell you, lean in, run toward it. Push harder when everything in you screams to stop. Because that is the edge where growth begins. Suspense is not your enemy. Suspense is your training partner. Suspense is your coach. Suspense is your fuel. Humanity's run continues. Think of this humanity as a runner. For thousands of years, we've been running. Through deserts, through ice, through fire, through wars, through plagues. Sometimes sprinting, sometimes crawling, sometimes bleeding in the dirt, but always running. And here we are. The race isn't finished. The finish line is not even in sight. And yet, too many of us want to stop. Too many of us want to quit, to sit down, to say, enough. But listen, you don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done. And humanity is not done. You are not done. The suspense you feel tonight, the weight on your chest, the whisper in your head, the ache in your bones, it is not the end. It is the proof that you're still in the race. Suspense is the sign that the run continues, and the run continues tonight. Through your breath, through your heartbeat, through your decision to keep going. Fire of the unknown, and the unknown is not empty. The unknown is fire. The unknown is the wall you hit at mile 80, the darkness that tries to swallow you, the silence that makes you doubt your own voice. But listen, the unknown is not against you. The unknown is your chance to grow. Suspense sharpens, the unknown transforms. Pain builds, fear burns. And on the other side of all of it is the person you were meant to become. David Goggins says, suffering is the true test of life. And tonight, you suffer not by bleeding on the battlefield, not by collapsing on a road, but by confronting the silence of your own mind. The suspense of the night is the suffering of the soul, and you must pass through it. The call of the night is quiet. The world rests, but you do not. Not completely. You lie in your bed and your body is tired, but something inside you resists surrender. Your mind still races, your spirit still aches, and deep in your chest, a whisper keeps repeating, you are not done. That whisper is not weakness. It is not distraction. It is the truth, because you are standing tonight where all of humanity has always stood, on the edge of tomorrow. Behind you lies history. Behind you lie fallen empires, broken dreams, and victories carved out of fire. Behind you lie the ancestors who suffered, fought, built, bled, and believed. Behind you is everything that has ever been, and ahead. Ahead is mystery. Ahead is suspense. Ahead is the unknown. And in that unknown, your destiny waits too. Suspense is the proofs. Suspense is not silence. It is not emptiness. Suspense is life. The silence before thunder is not dead. It is alive with energy. The pause before dawn is not void. It is heavy with promise. And that's where you are right now. You feel it. You feel it in the heaviness of your breath. You feel it in the ache of your body. You feel it in the battles you've fought this week, this year, this lifetime. You are here in the suspense, and the suspense is asking you one question. Will you rise or will you fall? Every age of history has stood in this same place. Every warrior, every thinker, every dreamer, every nation. The Greeks wondered, will Athens endure? The Romans wondered, will Rome stand forever? The medieval world wondered, is this the end or the beginning of something greater? And here we are again, wondering the same question, but suspense is not an ending. Suspense is a demand for courage. Suspense is not death. Suspense is proof of life. 3. The Goggins mindset at the edge. David Goggins knows suspense. He knows what it means to stand at the edge. He knows what it's like to run on broken legs, to bleed through miles, to face voices in his head screaming quit. Stop, you're done. And he didn't quit. He says, when you think you're done, you're only at 40%. That's what suspense is. Suspense is the 40%. Suspense is when everything in you says it's over, but the truth is you haven't even scratched the surface yet. Suspense is the test. Suspense is the battlefield of the soul. And the Goggins mindset says, you don't run from suspense. You don't cower before the unknown. You lean in, you push harder. You take suspense and turn it into fuel. You turn the question mark into an exclamation point. Suspense is not the enemy. Suspense is your ally. Suspense is your training partner. Suspense is your reminder that there is more inside you than you could ever imagine. 4. The race of humanity. Picture humanity. As a runner, we've been running for thousands of years. Running through deserts, running through ice, running through famine and fire and flood. Sometimes sprinting, sometimes crawling, sometimes bleeding in the dirt, but always running. And here we are. The race isn't finished. The finish line isn't even in sight. But too many of us are ready to stop. Too many are ready to sit down on the track, to say, I've done enough. Let someone else carry the torch. But listen, that's not how the race works. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done. And humanity is not done. You are not done. The suspense you feel right now is not the signal to quit. It is the sign that the run continues. It is the proof that your story isn't finished. The run continues tonight. Through your breath, through your heartbeat, through your decision not to give in to the weight of despair. Suspense is not the finish line. Suspense is the starting gun. 5. Fire of the unknown. The unknown is fire. The unknown is the wall at mile 80. The unknown is the silence at 3 a.m. The unknown is the fear of tomorrow, the doubt of today, the pain of yesterday. But listen, fire is not your enemy. Fire is your teacher. Fire is the forge. Suspense sharpens you. Fire transforms you. You burn, you ache, you cry, you suffer. And on the other side of that fire is the person you were always meant to be. David Goggins says, suffering is the true test of life. And tonight, in this bed, you suffer not by bleeding in battle, not by collapsing on a marathon road, but by confronting the silence of your own mind. The suspense of the night is the suffering of the soul, and you must pass through it. 6. Pain is the door. Pain is not a wall. Pain is a door. When you hit the wall, when you feel like you can't go another step, that's the moment the real journey begins. That's the 40%. Pain is the key. Pain is the threshold. Pain is the door to your higher self. And suspense is standing at that door, asking, will you knock? Will you walk through? Every great person who has ever lived has stood before this door. Marcus Aurelius stood before it and walked through with stoic calm. Rumi stood before it and walked through with love. Mandela stood before it and walked through with forgiveness, and now, tonight, you stand before it. Suspense is the handle. Pain is the key. Will you open it? 7. The bed is not the end tonight. As you lie in bed, you may feel like you've reached the end of your strength, the end of your fight, the end of your will. But the bed is not the end. The bed is the battleground. Your thoughts are the opponent. Your doubts are the enemy. Your weakness is the rival. And here, in the quiet of this night, you must fight one more time. You must remind yourself, you are not done. You must remind yourself, tomorrow is waiting. You must remind yourself, the suspense is not death, it is life. The bed is not the end. The bed is the beginning. Point 8. The warriors rest you are not weak for resting. You are not failing for closing your eyes. Rest is part of the war. Rest is part of the fight. But the mindset you carry into rest determines who you will be when you rise. Go to sleep tonight not with despair, but with fire. Not with fear, but with purpose. Not with defeat, but with suspense. Suspense is the proof that your story continues. You are a warrior lying down, not a warrior giving up. Rest like a warrior. Rest like a fighter. Rest like someone who knows the battle continues tomorrow, because it does not. Standing at the edge of tomorrow, you are here. Right now, standing at the edge of tomorrow. Behind you, history. Ahead of you, mystery. Around you, suspense. Within you, fire. And you have a choice, to rise or to fall, to continue or to quit. But I will tell you this, you are not done. Humanity is not done. The suspense you feel is not weakness. It is your signal. It is your calling. It is your proof of life. So breathe deep, hold strong, rest like a warrior, because tomorrow is waiting, and you will rise to meet it. 1. From suspense to wholeness. Every story has a pause. Every warrior has a silence. Every journey has a breath. And then comes the moment when silence shifts, when suspense fulfills itself, when the shadow before dawn becomes sunrise. That moment is eternity. Not eternity in the shallow sense of endless time. Not eternity as numbers stretched into infinity. Eternity is completion, wholeness, the moment when all pieces fit, when the broken becomes beautiful, when the scars become the story. Eternity is when the child becomes the elder, when the question becomes the answer, when the pain becomes the song. And tonight, lying in bed, you are closer to eternity than you think. 2. The transformation of struggle. Think about your hardest moments. The days when you thought you couldn't go on. The nights when the silence felt crushing. The failures that made you question your worth. At the time, they felt meaningless, heavy, cruel. But look back now. Didn't those very struggles shape you? Didn't those very nights teach you? Didn't those very failures sharpen you into who you are? Pain was never wasted. Struggle was never wasted. The suspense of your darkest hours was never wasted. Every broken piece has been gathered into the wholeness of who you are now. That's eternity. Eternity is your scars turned into wisdom. Eternity is your failures turned into strength. Eternity is your tears turned into fire. 3. Marcus Aurelius and the flame. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, sat in the silence of his chambers and wrote to himself, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He understood eternity. He understood that obstacles are not interruptions. They are the path itself. The suspense of his struggles, the weight of empire, the chaos of war, all of it was fuel. And so it is with you. The things you call obstacles, the things you call delays, the things you call failures, they are not interruptions. They are the way. They are the proof of eternity moving through you. For Rumi and the endless love Rumi, the mystic, whispered of eternity in another form. He said, "Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure." For him, eternity was love. Love not as fleeting romance, but as the eternal flame that burns through loss, through suffering, through silence. Eternity is when your pain becomes your cure. Eternity is when your scars become your guide. Eternity is when what once broke you now carries you. That's what the suspense of struggle was always pointing to. The arrival of eternity. The arrival of love in its deepest form. 5. Mandela and the freedom of forgiveness. And then there was Mandela, a man who spent decades in prison, caged, silenced, suspended in the longest night of his life. But he emerged not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with forgiveness, because he understood eternity. He understood that eternity is bigger than prison bars. Eternity is bigger than hate. Eternity is bigger than time itself. He walked out of that cell carrying not chains, but freedom. Not darkness, but light. That is eternity. When suffering is not wasted, when suspense is not death, when struggle is not the end, but the transformation. 6. Eternity is here. Not later. You don't have to wait until death for eternity. You don't have to wait until the end of all things. Eternity is not far away. Eternity is now. Eternity is in the laughter of children, proof that the story continues. Eternity is in the embrace of friends after long separation, proof that love endures. Eternity is in the quiet of prayer, proof that the soul is never alone. Eternity is in the memory of your struggle, softened into wisdom, proof that your pain was never wasted. Eternity is not a finish line. Eternity is every step, every breath, every act that ripples forever. And tonight, as you lie here, you are already living in eternity. 7. The Goggins, eternity, David Goggins, doesn't talk about eternity in soft words. He talks about it in blood, sweat, and miles. For him, eternity is when the pain breaks you down and you keep going. Eternity is when the world tells you you're done and you find more inside you. Eternity is when suffering carves you open and you discover your true self. Eternity is not some distant heaven. Eternity is what happens when you refuse to quit, when you refuse to surrender, when you keep pushing past the edge of yourself. That's eternity in the Goggins mindset. You are eternal when you refuse to die in the moment. You are eternal when you live as if nothing can stop you. And tonight, that's what you're invited into. Point 8. Joy is sorrow fulfilled. Here's the paradox. Joy and sorrow are not enemies. They are two halves of the same eternity. Joy is not the absence of sorrow. Joy is sorrow fulfilled. Joy is the song that suffering wrote, finally played to completion. Joy is the laughter that comes after tears. Joy is the light that shines through cracks in the wall. Every sorrow you've carried, every suspense you've endured, every weight you've borne, it is shaping the joy that will come. Your joy is already written. Your eternity is already here. 9. Rest in eternity so as you rest tonight. Rest differently. Rest not as someone escaping life. but as someone participating in eternity. Close your eyes with the knowledge that your scars are not wasted, that your struggles are not wasted, that your suspense is not wasted. Close your eyes knowing that eternity is in you. Eternity is around you. Eternity is through you. Rest in eternity. Rest in wholeness. Rest in joy, because tomorrow you rise again. Tomorrow you continue the race. Tomorrow you carry eternity into action. But tonight you rest as someone complete. 1. Fulfillment is not the end. Fulfillment is not the absence of struggle. It is not comfort, not luxury, not safety. Fulfillment is what happens when the storm passes and you realize the storm was never against you, it was shaping you. Fulfillment is when you look back at your scars and see not shame, but proof. Proof that you endured. Proof that you lived. Proof that you stood at the edge of tomorrow and you did not fall. Joy is not an accident. Joy is earned. Joy is carved out of fire, hammered out of struggle, sharpened out of suffering, and when you taste it, even for a moment, it is eternal. 2. The warrior's joy, David Goggins says, suffering is the true test of life. And here's the paradox. Those who suffer the deepest are often the ones who feel the greatest joy, because they understand something the world does not. The greater the pain, the greater the fulfillment. The harder the run, the sweeter the finish. The deeper the night, the brighter the dawn. A warrior's joy is not soft. A warrior's joy is not fragile. A warrior's joy is forged in fire. It is the laugh of someone who has crawled through hell and come out alive. It is the peace of someone who has faced their demons and refused to kneel. It is the smile of someone who knows, I was tested and I did not break. That is joy, that is fulfillment, that is eternity alive in the present. 3. Humanity's song, look at humanity. For thousands of years, we have suffered wars, famines, plagues, collapse, division, fear. And yet we sing in deserts, in caves, in cathedrals, in prisons. We sing in trenches, we sing in protests, we sing in celebrations. Our song is proof. Proof that joy is stronger than despair. Proof that fulfillment always rises out of pain. Proof that the story always continues. The suspense sharpened us, the eternity completed us, and now the joy sings through us. That is the human song, the song of fulfillment, the song of forever. 4. The proof of joy shows itself in small things. The laughter of children, proof that the story continues. The embrace of friends after long separation, proof that love endures. The quiet of prayer, proof that the soul is never alone. The memory of struggle softened into wisdom, proof that pain was never wasted. These are not small proofs, they are eternal proofs. And tonight, lying here in the silence, you carry them all. You are proof, you are the continuation, you are the fulfillment. 5. Goggins on fulfillment. Fulfillment, in Goggins' terms, is not comfort. It is not retirement. It is not saying, I made it, I'm done. Fulfillment is looking at yourself in the mirror and knowing you gave everything you had. Fulfillment is going to bed at night with no excuses left. Fulfillment is living in such a way that when your time is up, you don't wonder if you could have been more, because you were everything. Fulfillment is not about what you have. Fulfillment is about who you became, and who you became was forged in suspense, tested in fire, completed in eternity, and crowned in joy. 6. Joy as a cycle. Remember this. Joy is not the absence of sorrow. Joy is sorrow fulfilled. Your pain was not meaningless. Your nights were not wasted. Your doubts were not weakness. They were seeds. Seeds that cracked open in the soil of struggle, watered by your tears, broken by your weight, and grown into the tree of joy. You stand in fulfillment not because you escaped suffering, but because you endured it, because you faced it, because you let it shape you. That is the cycle: suspense, eternity, joy, fear, pain, fulfillment, darkness, fire, light. 7. The cinematic march. Picture it now. Humanity walking together, hand in hand, across the unknown plane of the future. Some stumble, some rise, some fall. But the march continues, always. Suspense sharpened us. Eternity completed us. Joy carries us forward. This is not just your story. This is our story. A story of resilience. A story of survival. A story of forever. And as long as one voice speaks, as long as one soul rises, as long as one flame burns, humanity continues. And so do you. Point 8. The bedtime fulfillment now. As your eyes close, rest in fulfillment. Rest not as someone broken, but as someone complete. Rest not as someone defeated, but as someone victorious. Rest not as someone ending, but as someone beginning again. You have faced suspense. You have entered eternity. You have tasted joy. And tomorrow you rise again. Tomorrow you continue the race. Tomorrow you carry fulfillment into action. But tonight you rest in joy. Tonight you rest in fulfillment. Tonight you rest in Forever 9. The final crescendo, hear it now. The soundscape swelling. Violins rising, drums pounding, choirs echoing. The world exhaling in harmony. Picture it, the story of humanity. The story of you, from despair to resilience, from silence to fire, from loneliness to unity. The journey ends not in finality, but in forever. Because joy is eternal, fulfillment is eternal, humanity is eternal, and you are eternal.